to talk a little bit about Clemson, about their NIL story, about the comments of Brad Brownell that he made earlier this week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Chapel Fowler making his long-awaited and, frankly, honestly, well overdue return to the Rob Brown Show. What's up, young man? How we feeling, big dog?
I'm great. Yeah, I got my AirPods are finally in after I dropped them like 3 times as you were introducing me. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. Happy to chat with you all. Yeah, certainly a lot of stuff going on, even in a quote unquote dead month for college sports. So yeah, ready to get into it.
We call this around these parts, Chapel Fowler. I call it hashtag peak off season, right? This is a spot where people are ranking helmet designs and they're ranking end zone patterns and whatever. And that's fine. That's your thing. I like to talk about things that are actually impacting sports on and off the field. And Brad Brownell decided, hey, let's spice it up a little bit earlier this week. He did an interview with On3 Sports where he said that he expects the basketball program is going to be getting roughly 11% of Clemson's revenue share cap, that $20.5 million, which equates, I'm real bad at math, to around $2.25-ish million. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes of that, what was your takeaway? Was there anything about that interview with Brad that was new to you, shocking to you, kind of changed the way you're looking at this whole thing, or was that kind of expected in the budget for Clemson and their NIL/rev share budgeting?
Yeah, that was a very candid conversation. First of all, credit to Larry Williams at Tiger Illustrated, like you mentioned, for getting that done. I was not super surprised at like the number split itself. You know, that's kind of what I'd been hearing and what Graham Neff had more or less said. You know, the idea that Clemson is going to split revenue sharing money proportionally. You know, the teams that make a lot of revenue are going to get revenue, essentially. So I wasn't surprised to see basketball as the number 2, like a distant number 2 to football, but it was refreshing to see Brownell just come out and say it. Like you don't see that a lot from any like power conference coach. So I appreciated him just putting it out there. You know, 86%, 11%. That's good for me to know as a reporter and work with, because Clemson wasn't going to officially tell us, and they've been a little secretive FOIA-wise with what they're releasing and not releasing regarding revenue sharing stuff. So not surprised at what the number was, but I guess pleasantly surprised that Brad was just so willing to talk about it and like the challenges that present. Because, you know, you're kind of just lying if you're not saying that doesn't present a little bit of a challenge for a power conference team.
Yeah, he not only said that, but he also pointed out that he believes that some of the direct opponents of the Clemson Tiger basketball team will be getting up to maybe a little bit more than 20%. And I assume that's probably accurate for schools like North Carolina, for schools like Duke, that the basketball is as big, if not bigger than the brand in football. But I kind of looked at that and I took it. And tell me if this is a hot take, if I'm going too far, if I'm making too much of it. But I kind of looked at that and went, all right, on one hand, Clemson's football is the crown jewel. We all know that. But considering Brownell the last 2 years has really had this basketball team trending upward, I would think right now would be as good as ever has been to invest in the basketball team. Should I take this as Clemson thinks basketball is a secondary sport, or this is just how highly they think of football as the revenue generator?
Probably a combination. I mean, I think anybody at Clemson would be lying to themselves if they didn't say that football is like the power driver of everything in this athletic department they have. And in a lot of ways, the university too, like just the economic impact and the like fall Saturdays, what those 7 do for the local economy and everything. Like, and as you've seen, realignment is essentially driven by college football television contracts. Like, this is why all this crazy stuff has happened over the last however many years. Football matters no matter how much of a basketball school you are. I mean, you've even seen UNC Chapel Hill, to give an example, my alma mater. Like, this is a school that's a basketball blue blood, but they've spent all this money on Bill Belichick and a new football coaching staff and are trying to get back up to like a respectable level in football, because in a lot of ways, that's like what assigns you your value in these long-term TV deals, realignment, conference changes, all this stuff. So I think it's totally fair for Clemson to put that much money into football. I also think it's totally fair for Brownell to openly say, hey, you know what, like, this is the way it is. And I'm not like furious about it, but it is going to be a challenge and we are going to be at a disadvantage. You know, they have a pretty strong NIL stream, like donor stream. I think that's something he did a really good job of, especially in the early years of NIL portal stuff. I mean, compare him to what Dabo in football had been doing, and it felt like basketball just had stuff rolling. Like they were nailing it with a one or two really good, smart portal additions every single year. They were getting their guys paid, keeping them around. Basketball has like a nice little donor pocket, and in a lot of ways, that is Brad Brownell like cultivating that and bringing people on overseas trips and establishing this, Friends of Clemson basketball group that he'll like have cocktails with post game, every single home game and stuff like that. So he has worked really hard to build up the non-rev share parts of what they're going to be able to get and use money wise. But I mean, I would be in the same frame of mind if I was him and hearing that, hey, you're going to get 11% and this school's going to get 15, 20. And then all your schools that, don't have football, like a Gonzaga or a College of Charleston, like even these smaller schools, they might be up around you too, which is kind of crazy to think about if you're a power conference school. So fair for Clemson to do it, fair for Brownell to be a little bit ticked also. And knowing him a little bit, like he's going to let you know if he's a little irked about something, no matter who you are, which I respect a lot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I also appreciate it. And don't get me wrong, like I think it's a little politicking from Brad Brownell because Clemson, as you pointed out, kind of being quiet. They're not going to put the numbers out there. And for the record, that's not a Clemson thing. I think most schools are going to avoid it. I don't want everyone else knowing how I'm divvying up my cash because if I get it right, they'll copy. And if they don't, they'll take advantage, whatever. But I think it's got to be a little bit of politicking from Brad because if you put it out there in the public eye and you put it out there for Clemson fans to see, for the ones that truly do care about basketball and want to see it grow, et cetera, that the public pushback is the only thing that is going to change the way that works. So I felt it was politicking from Brad, and to keep it a buck with you, I got zero problems with him doing it.
Yeah, no, me either. I mean, he's done more with less for a long time. I think he understands very well that Clemson is a football school, first of all, for better or for worse, and he understands what that does for the entire athletic department, how that helps basketball, but at the same time, how that can also pull away from basketball. Like even in year, 15 or 16 for him, like he's willing to do the sort of stuff that like maybe a coach just getting started at a job would do in terms of program promotion. Like he's very available to the media. I mean, that interview, that's something that him and Larry Williams have done like every summer, almost since he's been there, like a long, like 3-hour sit down. Like that's the type of thing that you're probably not going to get annually with like a John Shire or Bill Self or Hubert Davis or something. So he very much is still like wanting to build the program and not like taking that as a negative, just knowing that's kind of part of the unique job he has. I think that's probably one of many things that kind of helped him stick around when Indiana came after him. And he kind of touched on that in that interview you mentioned too. The idea of here's all this stuff in Clemson's favor and just that like what they have right now is a pretty good marriage and probably in the modern era, like about as good as you can have the basketball program rolling with all the football money and considerations and stuff. So I think it's a pretty good fit, but at the same time, he can't not be silent about this type of stuff. So I'd imagine they probably got a few extra donations after he made that complaint from somebody who saw that and said, this can't happen.
Chapel Fowler covers Clemson for The State, joins us here on the Rob Brown Show and the Fan Upstate. I asked on Monday after this interview dropped, I asked Clemson fans on the show, first and foremost, like, are you good with this? And a lot of them said, yeah, like I want football to be good. And if I got to sacrifice other sports, we had a handful of people that said, nah, not really, but I understand it. And then we had a few that said, look, I want a good basketball team. We have had a legacy history of good coaches that have come here, not been able to then go on to success. And this is the reason why. Do you feel like in your coverage of this school, like basketball is a sport that Clemson is willing to invest in, or does this kind of send out the message, or is it fair to kind of read this as like we have a basketball team, but like, hey, if they make it, great, and if they don't, whatever? Because and I don't want that vibe, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're totally willing to invest, and then they have in a lot of ways outside of pure like rev share money percentage. But I think it's always going to come with an asterisk, and I think it's refreshing to at least hear Clemson acknowledge, not with direct numbers, but Graham Neff has said it, Dabo has hinted at it, like the idea of just how much money rev share wise Clemson is going to have football and what that can do for them. So I think that's always going to be the main thing for them. And again, like you could be upset about it, but I think from a pure like dollars and cents aspect and realignment and just everything that seems to matter in college athletics nowadays, like keeping keeping a program that is so valuable, so nationally relevant at that level, however you can, is probably going to trump just about anything else you do with any of your other 20 varsity sports. That's kind of just the reality nowadays. So I think, yeah, I mean, they've done stuff with, facilities. There's facility improvements going on right now at Little John. They've kind of done stuff with that. I don't know. I mean, they've offered like administrative support. Like there's a lot of guys that are involved in this NIL and portal stuff. Like they had a really good portal haul, I thought, this year, given who all they were losing and who all they needed to replace. And they were able to get some pretty solid guys that were being bid on by other pretty good high power conference schools. So I think the support is still there, but it's always going to come with a little bit of an asterisk. And I think you just kind of have to accept that. And I think Brownell, for the most part, has.
Chapel Fowler joining us here on the Rob Brown Show and the Fan Upstate. You had an article up on the State the other day that was just kind of a general overview of the NIL take, the strategy, et cetera, from Clemson. For folks maybe that haven't gotten an opportunity to check in and read that yet, give us kind of an overall summary of what the takeaway for you as you have watched this rev share, really more rev share than NIL, I guess, as you have watched the rev share story develop since the settlement a couple of weeks ago, and as schools are starting to solidify their tactics, their approach to it. What has been the big points to you and the takeaway about the strategy as Graham Neff and the Clemson athletic department has figured out where they are and where they're going?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the settlement is a good thing in terms of just keeping, player compensation, which to me has been long overdue for decades, like a little bit more, not like capped or in line, but kind of just, I guess, formalized. Kind of the basics of it are each school has a certain cut of their like media ticket revenue. It's like about 20% of that school's annual revenue, and that comes out to $20.5 million this year. So they have up to $20.5 million that they can spend directly by compensating their athletes and their teams. There's actually like a few little deductions within that $20.5 million number regarding like scholarships and like back payments with the Austin stuff as part of this whole settlement. So the number ends up being about $18 million is what I've been told for what each school that's committing the maximum amount of money has to directly spend on their athletes on their teams. So within that 18 million, that's kind of the number you're working with. Again, Brownell has confirmed publicly what essentially the numbers say, which is football is going to be massive, higher than most schools. I think the original split that the judge put in kind of the back pay settlement was like 75% to football and something like 15% men's basketball, 10 to women's basketball, and whatever else was to everybody else. So Clemson obviously higher on football, a little bit lower on men's basketball. Just about 3%-ish left for baseball and other sports. But kind of what they've done on top of that, and I think this is a smart move, one that's expensive but probably makes some sense just from a PR perspective and keeping your other coaches and teams perspective happy. They fully funded essentially the rest of their other sports teams. So they're adding like 150 scholarships. Baseball, 11.7, that's not a thing anymore. Their baseball team will have 34 scholarships. I don't know, women's lacrosse, softball, like name an Olympic sport team. They're going to have a fully funded roster, which means no walk-ons, but, more people that are not having to pay their own way onto the team. So that's kind of the benefit for the lower level sports and what Clemson has pushed pretty heavily. And as they should, because that is a little bit unique. There's not a ton of schools nationally that are doing this fully funded scholarship stuff on top of their rev share money. Like South Carolina, for instance, is adding about 50-ish new scholarships. Clemson, in the other hand, is, 150 fully funding all their teams. So they are a little bit unique in that aspect. So I think the combination of that and the high football percentage probably merged together to become a pretty happy medium for everyone involved, even though football is definitely leaning. Yeah.
Chapel Fowler covers Clemson for the State. You can follow him over on X, and if you're not already doing it, you absolutely should. His handle is @Chapel Fowler, ChapelFowler.